Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how the Idaho Freedom Index helps us as taxpayers, as citizens, as maybe you're a legislator, maybe you're someone who one day wants to run for the legislature. I know there are people who don't like the idea that every piece of public policy, every bill is analyzed, every bit of spending is analyzed, and then scored according to, does it promote freedom? Does it take away from freedom? Well, people are asking, why wouldn't that be applied to, say, President Trump's big, beautiful bill? Got some interesting answers for you, and hopefully something that will help you understand how the Idaho Freedom Index actually helps Idaho. I'll tell you about it right after this.
All reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Again, welcome to Nowhere to Hide. You know, every time the legislature gets together and does its thing in its yearly session, there's always a lot of analysis during and after the session. Well, was it a good session? Was it a bad session? And of course, it depends on who you talk to. For instance, the teachers' unions who are not happy about school choice. Why, this is the worst legislative session we've ever had. But for parents and others who are advocates of school choice and actually, frankly, I think for objective observers, this was a solid session, this last 2025 legislative session. But if you really want to check it out for yourself, do you really want to crunch the numbers and see how did each bill that passed scored, you really need to get your hands on a copy of the 2025 Idaho Freedom Index. Now, this is something that's published by the Idaho Freedom Foundation. It's not just a matter of, well, we like this person or this personality. It's a matter of, actually, I'm going to let Brent Regan explain how this index works and why sometimes the comparisons, well, if it's working so well in Idaho, why can't we just translate it to the federal government? Or maybe why doesn't Idaho do things more like the federal government? Brent Regan, who sits on the board for the Idaho Freedom Foundation, had a wonderful column called Sophistry. This just came out in the last couple of days. It is worth your time. Go to idahofreedom.org and check it out. I'm going to share some excerpts with you because I want you to, first of all, understand, I mentioned sophistry in the last episode of Nowhere to Hide, and Brent gives a beautiful definition and example of what this looks like. He says, sophistry is the use of fallacious arguments with the intent to deceive. So critics will use sophistry to make an argument when the facts don't support their position. We see this all too often in the political realm where false arguments are epidemic. So as an example, and this is classic, Trump drinks water, and you know who else drank water? Hitler. Yeah. Therefore, Trump is Hitler. Now, Brent says you can laugh at that as absurd, but is it as absurd as Democrats claiming that they're saving democracy when they did everything they could to deny Trump a spot on the ballot? And in the process, we're denying citizens or depriving citizens the opportunity to vote, meanwhile anointing Harris as their nominee without a single vote cast for her. Okay, it's a fair question. But Brent also says in other cases, you'll see a purposeful misapplication of the facts to build a house of cards argument. And this is a great example, but it also illustrates why the Freedom Index is such an essential tool. So a recent example, he says, was an attempt to apply the Idaho Freedom Foundation's Freedom Index metrics to the big, beautiful bill just signed into law by President Trump. Now, to understand the Freedom Index, Brent explains it so beautifully here. It's built on 14 metrics that are used to evaluate proposed legislation. So it's not a matter of let's wet our fingers, stick it up in the air, and just see which way the winds are blowing. The metrics ask the bill, or if the bill increases taxes, if it increases regulation, if it creates more government, etc., and then simply scores them as positive, neutral, or not applicable, or negative. So the Freedom Index was designed to evaluate Idaho legislation, and this is key, because Idaho bills are limited to a single subject. Remember the whole proposition that got on the ballot about ranked choice voting, and that was actually challenged, and I think at a point successfully challenged, for trying to cram two issues into one bill. But nonetheless, each bill is reviewed and judged by a panel of experts who determine the score for each of the 14 metrics. Then the scores are totaled for the bill's overall rating. But the bottom line is there's an objective standard. That matrix is used to determine whether or not it enlarges or shrinks freedom. Now, Brent says critics of the Freedom Index attempted to use the metrics here to evaluate the big beautiful bill, but he says the problem is that the big beautiful bill is not just a single subject bill. And this is true with a lot of the spending bills, particularly the omnibus bills that are passed by or continuing resolutions passed by Congress. So the big beautiful bill has hundreds of elements, which he says makes it impossible to honestly score. But it is possible to use the metrics dishonestly, which is what happened. So in this instance, where if you take a metrics from the Freedom Index, like does it increase taxes, and you apply it to the big beautiful bill, Brent says you will find the answer is yes and no. Because one element of the big beautiful bill might increase taxes while another one decreases it. You see the problem here? You can't just find the average, because a small change in a broad tax may be bigger than a big change in a narrow tax. But of course, that didn't stop critics who cherry-pick the elements to fallaciously achieve the desired negative result and then present it as fact. So, Brent says it gets worse, though. After abusing the Freedom Index metrics to make a false argument, we had critics who go on to say, well, the Freedom Index is defective, it shouldn't be trusted. It's as if they tried to use a screwdriver as a hammer, failed, and then blamed the screwdriver for not being a good hammer. The grassroots conservative movement in Idaho, he says, was incredibly successful, with the 2025 legislative session being one of the best ever for the conservative agenda. Now, he says those who lost elections to conservatives are predictably upset. They remain as seething critics. He says, notice how they're not critical of the Democrats or Marxists or socialists or lobbyists. No, they're critical of the conservatives, which Brent says really kind of tells you all that you need to know. So he says, winners analyze, losers criticize. Critics may claim, well, we have a noble mission to bring transparency and accountability, when the fact is, as Brent says, these people are losers, often cowering and afraid behind anonymous screen names. They lose elections, they lose power, they lose respect, and they're upset they're not in charge. And since you can't argue with success, they attack successful conservatives with sophistry fueled by lies. So hopefully that gives you a little bit clearer idea of what to look for in terms of, if someone's appealing to purely your emotion, or for that matter, if someone's arguments consist entirely of here's why everybody else is wrong, as opposed to here's what we stand on, here's what we believe in, you might want to rethink, how much you're willing to hang your hat on that particular point of view. I know it's painting with a broad brush to say people who are negative really don't have that much to offer. But if it's enemy-driven thinking, maybe that's a question you need to ask yourself, is does it really have that much to offer me? All right, two unrelated issues, but I'm bringing this up because this is going to be important in the near future. Now, maybe you heard about this tragic quadruple homicide that happened in the Magic Valley last week. And long story short, the gist of it is a man who has been a mental patient for many, many years, apparently dealing with schizophrenia, went on a spree and ended up killing 4 completely unrelated people, very random, very, horrific in the sense that, wow, that kind of shatters your sense of peace, especially, in a relatively, small and quiet community such as the Mini-Cassia area. But I bring you this headline, courtesy of KTVB.com, to illustrate that this is not the last we're going to hear of this story, because, yes, it's a huge tragedy, and it points to a very real problem with mental health. But the headline here, preventable, is setting the stage for something that I promise you will be coming up in Idaho's public policy arenas, particularly in the legislature, in the not-so-distant future. And that is red flag laws against gun owners. Preventable. Idaho family warned police of their father's mental health crisis years before alleged quadruple homicide. But the whole gist of the article comes back to his family saying the police wouldn't take his guns from him. They wouldn't take his guns. And I know it's terrible, in the sense that, well, and look, he went out and he did something. But if he had not done something to constitute, in other words, if he hadn't actually caused harm, or there wasn't something that reasonably could point to, yes, he's about to, harm someone or is capable of harming someone, the police had no business taking his guns. I'm sorry. I know that upsets people to hear that, but by enacting red flag laws, which someone is going to try to do, using this tragedy, this crime, as the springboard to get the kind of emotional leverage they need to get it through, it punishes the innocent by taking away a measure of their freedom without due process. That is why red flag laws are a bad idea and something that we cannot allow to take hold in Idaho. Again, I'm just telling you, this is something that's going to be coming up in the not so distant future. Be aware and be on the lookout for it. Preventable. It was preventable. If we just had enough laws, we could prevent every bad thing from happening. You hear how ridiculous that sounds on the surface, but legislators think, but we're doing something, even if it's not the right thing. One last thing, and this is for those who have been trying to get ivermectin over the counter. There have been some concerns that, well, there are pharmacies saying that they can't sell it to us without a prescription. And so Ryan Spoon actually went into a Treasure Valley pharmacy, and he says, I spoke to the pharmacist because I wanted to find out the real answer. And he says, I saw it right away. They don't stock any shelves of truly over-the-counter type. But he said, look, pharmacists have prescribing authority. They don't need a doctor's permission to write a prescription for it. So if you go to a pharmacist that's carrying ivermectin over the counter, they can prepare an order of 90 capsules, sell it to anybody who asks. You don't need a reason for it. So it's kind of like some of the cold and cough medications, not exactly over the counter. You have to ask for it, maybe even show ID, but it is available without a prescription. And that's a good thing. And thank you, Idaho lawmakers, for adding to that bit of medical freedom. It's something that we truly appreciate and hopefully will not squander moving forward. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
All reporters are biased. The Idaho Press Club are biased. All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot.
That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money.